They say love makes you blind, but in my case, it made me vulnerable. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, born in 1959 in Melbourne, Australia. Back in my late 60s, my husband pushed me off a yacht and my sister stood there smiling as I fought for my life in the Atlantic. I felt betrayed beyond words, but then something happened that changed everything. Today, at 65, I'm finally sharing this because silence only empowers the wicked. If you're listening, drop your location below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I was the second daughter in a small, hard-working family. My father was a tram conductor, and my mother sold baked goods to make ends meet. I always had an instinct for business even as a child. I'd buy lollipops in bulk and sell them to kids at school for a small profit. By the time I turned 18, I was already running a tiny sweet stall at the corner of Collins Street. I wasn't just selling sugar. I was building something that gave me identity and pride. My sister, Claudia, however, never liked it. She was older, prettier, and more social. But I was the one who people began to notice for ambition. At family dinners, I would speak about how one day I'd own a factory that produced candies by the thousands. Claudia would smirk and say, "Who would want to spend their life making sweets? That's child's play." She wanted to be seen as sophisticated, someone who belonged in high society. But beneath her mockery, I sensed envy. She never forgave me for being different, for having a kind of drive she didn't. I brushed it aside for years, convincing myself we were just two sisters on separate paths. My candy business grew slowly. Painfully, I worked long nights, stirring caramel in steel pots until my hands blistered, delivering boxes to shops myself in an old van. When I turned 30, one of my products, the Golden Honey Crunch, caught the attention of a major supermarket chain. That single deal changed my life. Within 5 years, I had factories in 3 cities, employees who became like family, and a name that resonated with sweetness and trust. I became known as the woman who had turned sugar into an empire. Yet with each achievement, Claudia seemed to grow colder. She never congratulated me. She only attended my store launches when there were cameras around, so she could pose as my biggest supporter. It was in those days of rapid success that I met Richard. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of charisma that filled a room, he introduced himself at a charity gala. I still remember how he offered me a glass of champagne and said, "You look like a woman who's built everything herself." That kind of strength deserves admiration. His words melted me. I had spent so much time proving myself in a man's world that his attention felt like a balm. Within 2 years, we were married in an intimate ceremony overlooking the Yarra River. In the beginning, life with Richard was bliss. He encouraged my ambitions, claimed to be proud of my independence, and even sat in on some of my factory board meetings. He made me laugh, which was something I hadn't done freely in years. My employees respected him, my family welcomed him, and even Claudia, to my surprise, appeared thrilled. She called him brother-in-law with exaggerated fondness, lingering in conversations with him longer than necessary. But at that time, I chose not to see it. The first crack appeared 3 years into the marriage. I noticed Richard's spending habits becoming excessive: luxury watches, cars he didn't need, weekend getaways where he'd insist on gambling. I had always been careful with money. To me, wealth was not for flaunting, but for sustaining. One night I asked him, "Richard, are you in some kind of financial trouble?" He laughed it off. "Darling, I just want us to live a little. Don't be such a businesswoman all the time." His dismissal stung, but I let it pass. Around the same period, Claudia began visiting my home more often. She would drop by unannounced, bringing bottles of wine and suggesting we all spend evenings together. I wanted to believe she was simply trying to bond, but there was an undertone in her glances, a sly sparkle in her eyes whenever Richard was near. Once, late at night, I walked into the living room to find them whispering. They stopped abruptly as I entered, smiling too quickly. As though rehearsed, my chest tightened with suspicion, But when I asked Claudia about it later, she rolled her eyes. Eleanor, you're becoming paranoid. I was only asking Richard about investing. You think the world revolves around your business. Despite my doubts, I buried my concerns. I had built my life on trust, trusting workers, trusting suppliers, trusting myself. Admitting that my husband and my sister might betray me was too heavy a truth to carry then. But the unease grew. Richard started taking business trips that had no paper trail, while Claudia suddenly seemed flush with cash. She began wearing designer clothes and driving a new car, yet she had no job to account for it. It was my assistant, Sophie, who first nudged me toward reality. One afternoon, she entered my office cautiously and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't want to overstep, but I saw Mr. Whitmore having lunch with Miss Claudia yesterday." They looked closer than family. Her words pierced me. My heart pounded, but my head resisted. "Thank you, Sophie," I said calmly, though inside I was shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories replayed Richard brushing off my questions, Claudia's smug smile, their whispered conversations. I realized I needed clarity, not assumptions. The next morning, I hired a private investigator named Thomas Callahan, a man known for his discretion. "Follow them," I told him. "I want facts, not feelings." The weeks that followed were a torment. Thomas would bring me photographs, Richard entering luxury hotels with no official meeting scheduled, Claudia withdrawing large sums of cash from accounts she shouldn't have had. My hands would tremble as I flipped through the evidence, but I forced myself to keep going. Then one evening, Thomas leaned forward across my desk, his voice low. "Eleanor, I don't think this is just an affair. I think they're planning something bigger, something dangerous." He was right, with hidden cameras installed discreetly in my home and on the yacht Richard had insisted we use for family trips. I discovered the horrifying truth. One recording captured Richard and Claudia in my study. Claudia's voice was sharp. "She's getting older. If we don't act, soon she put everything into that foundation of hers and leave us nothing." Richard replied coolly, "The ocean doesn't keep records. One slip, one push, and it's done." We split everything 50-50. I felt the blood drain from my body as I watched. My own husband, my own sister, plotting my death-like business. Partners. I gripped the edge of my desk, bile rising in my throat, rage burning through my veins. In that moment, every illusion shattered. I knew I had to prepare, not just to protect myself, but to outsmart them. I couldn't confront them, yet it would only push them into acting faster. So I played my part. When Richard suggested a romantic getaway on the yacht, I smiled sweetly and agreed. When Claudia chirped, "I'll come along too," "Wouldn't that be fun?" I nodded as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was counting every second, every move, storing evidence, and bracing myself for the storm I knew was coming. The betrayal was no longer just suspicion. It was a fact branded into my heart. I realized then that survival would require something I had mastered my whole life in business strategy. The morning we boarded the yacht, the sky was deceptively calm, painted in shades of soft gold and pale blue. Richard walked ahead of me, whistling as if he carried no secrets in his chest. Claudia followed close behind, her silk scarf fluttering like a snake's tongue in the wind. I, Eleanor Whitmore, walked slowly, every step heavy with the knowledge of what they intended for. Emmy, my heart beat hard, but my face carried only serenity. If they wanted a performance, I would give them the show of. Richard wrapped an arm around my shoulder when we stepped onto the deck. "Darling, you look tense. The sea is supposed to relax you." His voice dripped with honey, but I heard the venom beneath it. I forced a smile and replied, "It will." "Love, I just need a little champagne to ease me into it." Claudia laughed lightly, pouring me a glass, her eyes flicking to Richard in silent agreement. I pretended not to notice. By noon, the yacht was far from the shore, swallowed by the vastness of the Atlantic. The crew had been dismissed for the day. Richard had arranged a private sail, just the three of us. I held the glass Claudia had given me, swirling the liquid slowly. I knew it had been spiked. The investigator had warned me they would likely drug me before the accident. I raised it to my lips, letting the liquid touch but not pass them, then tipped it back into the sea when their backs were turned. To them, I must have looked drowsy soon after, my head resting lazily on the chair. Inside, I was wide awake, listening. Richard's voice broke the silence first. Tonight's the night. Once she's gone, everything falls into place. Claudia's reply was a hiss. Don't waste time, Richard. Push her when she's near the edge. She won't even scream. My stomach tightened, rage twisting like a knot. I had spent my life building something beautiful, and these two, the man I once loved and the sister I once trusted, wanted to erase me with a single shove. I stood, feigning a wobble. I think I'll take some air, I murmured. My legs carried me toward the deck's railing, where the sea below churned with quiet menace. I placed my hand on the polished wood, steadying myself. Richard followed like a predator stalking prey. Claudia lingered a few steps behind, her lips curled in a faint smile. Suddenly, Richard pressed close. His hand gripped my arm harder than necessary. Careful, Eleanor, don't fall. His words sliced into me, confirmation of his intent. I looked him square in the eye, my voice calm but sharp. I know, Richard. I know everything. For a split second, his face faltered. Claudia's eyes widened, but only briefly before her expression hardened into cold steel. Then it saves us the trouble, she spat. With a sudden shove, Richard forced me against the railing. I fought back, shoving my elbow into his ribs, clawing at his shirt. You won't take what I've built, I screamed. He growled, his strength overpowering mine. Claudia darted forward, her hands pushing at my back. My nails scraped wood, my muscles burned with desperate resistance, but gravity pulled me into the abyss. The plunge into the water was brutal, like hitting a wall of ice. My breath was torn from me, and the salty sting of the Atlantic rushed into my throat. Above, the yacht's white belly glided away, leaving me thrashing in its wake. I surfaced, gasping, choking, my arms flailing against the unforgiving waves. For a moment, panic threatened to consume me. I was 65, not a young woman anymore. My limbs ached, my lungs screamed. I could almost hear Claudia's laugh. In the distance, see Richard's smug face leaning over the railing. But survival is a language I've always spoken fluently. I forced myself to breathe in rhythm, to conserve my strength. Floating on my back, I stared at the endless sky. My empire had begun with a single sweet. My survival would begin with a single breath. I refused to let them win. Hours blurred. The sun sank low, painting the water crimson and gold, and I felt my energy draining. I thought of my workers in the factory, of Sophie's loyal face, of every child who had unwrapped one of my candies with joy. Their smiles gave me strength. I whispered into the wind, not yet. I'm not done. Night fell, cloaking me in darkness. The waves rocked me like a cruel lullaby. My body was numb, my lips cracked with salt. Just when despair began to creep in, I heard the faint hum of an engine. A beam of light cut through the night. A fishing boat approached, its deckhands shouting in Portuguese. I lifted an arm weakly, my voice barely a croak. Help! Please, 2 men hauled me aboard, their rough hands surprisingly gentle. My body collapsed onto the wooden deck, trembling violently. One of them covered me with a coarse blanket, the other pressed a bottle of water to my lips. Senora, you are safe, one murmured. Tears spilled from my eyes as I clutched the bottle. Safe, alive, the fishermen brought me to a small coastal town in Portugal. I stayed with them for 2 days, regaining my strength before contacting Sophie through a secure line Thomas had given me earlier. When she heard my voice, she sobbed, Eleanor, I thought you were gone. They announced you were lost at sea. My chest tightened. Richard and Claudia had already declared me dead. I'm not gone, I said firmly, but they will wish I was. Back in Melbourne weeks later, I reunited with my circle, Sophie, Daniel Harrington, my lawyer, Annika Mehta, the cybersecurity expert, and Detective Grace O'Connor. We gathered in my study late into the night, surrounded by files, recordings, and photographs. I played them the tape of Richard and Claudia's plan, their voices echoing through the room like ghosts. Grace shook her head slowly. It's airtight. They plotted attempted murder, financial conspiracy, and fraud. We'll take them down, but I wasn't satisfied with legal justice alone. I wanted them to taste the same fear they fed me. I wanted them to see the empire they lusted after crumble in their grasp, knowing they would never touch it. Richard and Claudia thought they had succeeded. They were preparing to split my fortune, maneuvering through boardrooms and lawyers, parading their false grief in public. But I was coming back not as the victim they imagined, but as the storm they never saw coming. When I finally walked back into my own mansion, the air inside felt thick with ghosts. Richard had moved into my home as though he were the rightful king, and Claudia had made herself comfortable too, lounging on my velvet chairs and sipping wine from my crystal glasses. They had declared me dead, held a memorial filled with crocodile tears, and now they were carving up my empire like vultures picking at a carcass. But the truth, I was very much alive, and I had returned not for comfort but for justice. That the plan was delicate, like threading sugar into spun glass. One misstep and it would shatter. Daniel Harrington, my lawyer, prepared the legal groundwork. Annika Mehta, with her brilliance in cybersecurity, hacked into Richard's hidden accounts and Claudia's encrypted emails. Grace O'Connor, steadfast as ever, coordinated quietly with law enforcement. Sophie, my dear assistant, became my anchor. Her presence reminded me that loyalty still existed in a world tainted by betrayal. Together, we were not just gathering evidence. We were laying a trap. We began by leaking subtle rumors into Richard's circles, whispers that some of the board members were questioning the legitimacy of his sudden takeover. Richard, arrogant and reckless, reacted exactly as we hoped. He doubled down on controlling the company, moving funds hastily, and demanding blind loyalty. Each desperate move was documented. Claudia, on her end, became careless. She deposited large sums into a foreign account that Annika traced in less than 24 hours. The walls around them were already crumbling. They just didn't know. Yet, the night of their downfall is seared into my memory. We invited them to a board meeting at the mansion. Richard arrived in his tailored suit, carrying the swagger of a man who thought he had one. Claudia wore a silk dress the color of blood, her smile smug, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I waited in the study, my back to the door, letting them stew in curiosity. When I finally turned, their faces drained of color, surprise. I said softly. Claudia's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the carpet. Richard staggered a step back, his lips parting but no sound escaping. "Eleanor, but you," he stammered. "Dead?" I finished for him. "You should know better, Richard. I've survived far worse than the likes of you." For a moment, silence stretched, heavy as stone. Then Claudia hissed, "This isn't possible." "You were thrown into the Atlantic by my own husband and sister," I interrupted, my voice calm but laced with fire. "Yes, I remember every second, but you underestimated me. You thought greed made you strong, but it only made you sloppy, with a nod to Grace." The projector flickered to life. The room filled with recordings of their whispered plans, emails detailing fraudulent transfers, voice notes dripping with malice. Each revelation was a dagger, each piece of evidence undeniable. Richard's face twisted from shock to fury, Claudia's from arrogance to desperation. "You set us up." Richard roared, his composure unraveling. "No," I replied evenly. "You set yourselves up. I just gave the world a front row seat." Law enforcement stormed in minutes later, handcuffs clinking like a symphony of justice. Richard struggled, shouting about conspiracies, while Claudia broke, her tears staining her perfect dress. "Richard, tell them it was your idea," she wailed. He spat at her. "You greedy witch, you pushed harder than I ever did." And just like that, the alliance that had nearly cost me my life dissolved into ashes. The trial was swift but merciless. Richard's past came to light: debt, scams, a trail of broken women who had all lost their wealth to him. He was sentenced to life without parole. Claudia, cornered by her own greed, received 25 years as the judge's gavel struck. I felt not triumph, but release, justice, cold and final. But justice alone does not heal wounds. Healing required more. I threw myself into building the Second Chance Foundation, a haven for victims of financial betrayal and domestic schemes. We offered legal aid, counseling, and financial literacy workshops. I invested in small family-owned businesses, the kind of dreamers I once was, giving them the tools to thrive. Every handshake, every grateful smile reminded me why I had fought to survive, not just for myself, but for those who had no voice. Yet, one part of me remained restless. Claudia. Blood had bound us once, jealousy had broken us later, and now prison walls separated us. Months passed before I gathered the courage to visit her. She looked smaller, diminished, her eyes hollow. For a long time, we sat in silence across the cold metal table. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you come?" "To understand," I said softly. Her lip trembled. "I hated that you made something of yourself while I was left behind. Every success of yours felt like my failure. I thought if I had what you had, I'd matter to you." I studied her, this sister I had loved and lost. My chest ached with sorrow, not anger. "Claudia, you mattered already, but envy blinded you. It destroyed us both." Her tears fell, silent and bitter. I placed my hand on the table, not reaching for hers, but leaving space between us. "I forgive you," I whispered, "but we are no longer family." That bond was broken the day you tried to kill me. When I left the prison, I felt lighter. Forgiveness was not for her. It was for me. Months later, I chartered another yacht. This time, the deck was filled with laughter, friends, and survivors from my foundation. I stood at the railing, holding a bouquet of yellow roses. With a steady hand, I scattered them into the sea at the exact spot where Richard and Claudia had betrayed me. The petals floated gently, like fragments of pain released into the ocean. The waves did not claim me this time. They carried my offering with grace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to myself, they thought the ocean would take me. Instead, it gave me back to myself. Today, at 65, I stand not as a victim, but as a woman who survived betrayal, reclaimed her dignity, and turned scars into strength. My story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been broken and found the courage to rise again. So if you're listening now, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and tell me in the comments, what's the greatest lesson betrayal ever taught you? Because for me, it's this: forgiveness frees the soul, revenge sharpens justice, and survival is the sweetest victory of all. Moral lesson: even the deepest betrayal cannot erase your worth. Heal, forgive, rebuild, and let your scars guide others toward strength.